Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. This is Comic Book Grails, another video, another part rather, in this series. I hope you enjoyed the first one where I covered, I believe it was Amazing Fantasy 15, Crime Patrol 15, and something else I don't remember off the top. My Incredible Hulk 181. Like I said in that video, this series is going to be limited. It's not going to be an ongoing series. But I just wanted to go through the collection and show you what I think some people would consider a comic book grail. All right. So I have 3 more books. Every video will go over 3 books that I think anyone would consider a comic book grail of sorts. All right. Now the first one I want to show is a book that I got when I returned to the hobby. When I came back to the hobby in 2013, there were a bunch of books I wanted to upgrade. There were a bunch of books I wanted to get for the very first time. And this was one of those books that I wanted to get for the very first time. I've always known about it, and it was always pricey, even when I first started collecting. And it was always something that was just a little out of reach for me. And here we have XMen number 94. This book here with number 94, this is when the comic book series X-Men was restarted, rebooted if you will, in the mid-1970s. For those of you that know your comic book history, in particular X-Men comic book history, the series ended with issue 66 in 1970. Truth be told, the X-Men series from the 1960s wasn't a big financial success, and that's why it went into reprints after issue 66, starting with issue 67 all the way to issue 93. And it was with, I believe, I forget what number it was, maybe FOOM number 10. I think it was FOOM 10 that introduced, it was a Marvel fan magazine of sorts. And it came out in the mid-70s, early to mid-70s, where it would introduce fans of Marvel Comics what they were planning to do. Sometimes previews of certain characters would show up in this magazine to let the fans know what was yet to come in the comics. And I believe it was FOOM 10. If I'm wrong, I don't have the issue, but if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments. It was when we were introduced to the fact that the X-Men were going to be rebooted with a new team. And this new team, although shows up in Giant Size X-Men number 1, which I'll show you in a few moments, because that is obviously a grail, and it's related to this book. But this is when they first showed up. The new team showed up in the main series. And it was Chris Claremont that started to pen the series for, 16 years? From the mid-70s all the way to the early 90s. That's one hell of a run, and he's did a lot of great work. Reinventing some of the older characters and inventing stories for these characters that really carried, I feel, the Marvel Universe in the 1980s. X-Men at one time, I believe, was more popular than Spider-Man. And to be more popular than Spider-Man is saying a lot, because Spider-Man was a very popular character right from his introduction. Like I said in my last one of these, some people will say that it was the Fantastic Four, all that stuff that started the Marvel. They're the ones. Yeah, but the Fantastic Four didn't carry the Marvel Universe. Yeah, they showed up in the 1960s. They introduced some pretty cool stories, some great artwork by Jack Kirby. They introduced the Black Panther. They introduced Galactus, Silver Surfer, Doctor Doom. It's no joke what the Fantastic Four introduced, and I'm not bashing Fantastic Four, but later on, that series didn't do much, from the 1970s all the way, I think, to the present. It was other series, like X-Men, and of course Spider-Man, that really carried Marvel Comics, Marvel Universe. And this book here was really one of the starts that led Marvel Comics to be very popular again, I believe, from the mid-70s to the 80s. And then, of course, in the 90s, all those things happened in comic books, and with the crash and all that. But that's topic for another story. Now you know the significance of that book. the significance for me is it was one of the books I've always wanted to get. And I've told this story before on this channel when eBay was just maybe a couple years old and I found out that they were selling comic books on eBay. I placed a bid and won a copy of X-Men 94. I don't remember what the grade was at the time, but I was like, it was about $125 was the winning bid. I highly doubt it was a 9.8 or a 9.0 or anything like that. But I don't think it was a low grade either. But I just said, back then I was like, I attempted to come back to comics in 2001. And I was just like, screw it. And that's one of the reasons why I got kicked off of eBay, because I didn't pay for X-Men 94. But then I created another account, and I've had that account ever since then, since 2002. But yeah, it's a very significant book, and it's definitely a grail. And even though, like I said, the beginning of this video, it was always out of my range when I first started collecting. It was always kind of pricey. And even in 2001, I thought that was way too much to spend. That's why I didn't pay it. But it really shot up in value over the last year. And it might have even been a little underrated for a little while. But I think there was a time, though, I must say, that X-Men 94 was more popular than Giant Size X-Men #1, if you could believe that. I think even Dr. Von Schiller would tell you that there was a time from the 70s to the 80s. I don't know about so much about the 90s, but 70s and 80s, if you were an X-Men collector and you really liked the new X-Men, you wanted to collect the new X-Men stuff other than the old stuff like X-Men #1, this was the book to get. It really was. And then I think in the 90s to present, it's sort of Giant Size really became one of the big ones. And Giant Size was always big too. But I think this was the one that everyone wanted. Regardless. It's a good book. Both that and my second book on this in this video and this are very good to have. This is Giant Size X-Men #1. And it's tied in to X-Men 94. I mentioned FOOM 10 gave Marvel readers a preview of what was to come in this book. Gave you a preview of the new X-Men. And this book ushered it in, and this book carried it. So I would think that they are grails for anybody. Especially Giant Size X-Men. Giant Size X-Men, I think, is more valuable than the X-Men 94, and it's still a great book to own for any X-Men fan. This is the big one, and there was a time when this one was really shooting up in price. It's still pretty expensive to get nowadays. I mean, I've said before, and I'll probably say it again, and I'll say it again right now, that if you're a new comic book collector or you want to get into comics and you really like the X-Men or you really like Spider-Man, it's kind of difficult to get into it right now because the prices are so expensive, and a lot of these books are not going to come down, or at least come down to what they used to be 2 years ago and before that. And I think Giant Size X-Men is one of them. But this is such a great book. The story that I want to share with this one is a story that I've told before on this channel. This is not my original copy of Giant Size X-Men. I had a lower grade copy. It was probably a 3.5 that I bought way back when I first started collecting comic books. And believe me, I was very happy to have it. Even though I wanted to get X-Men 94, I preferred the Giant Size over X-Men 94, and I still wanted that one too. But anyway, Giant Size was a book that I had in my collection ever since I started collecting, a year after I started collecting. And like I said, it was about a 3.5, but I loved it. I loved that book. I remember getting it. I remember when I first got that book, well, let me tell you the story how I got it. It was $65. All right, it was $65 for a 3.5. I only had $50 in my pocket, and that was a lot back then for me because I was, 14, 15. But I had some of those Spider-Man trading cards that just came out, and I had some of the Chase cards. So I said to the guy that had the 3.5, I said, I'll give you $50 and I'll give you these cards. And he sort of looked at me, pitied me, and he said, okay. And I wound up bringing the book home, and believe me, I loved it. And shortly after I got that book, I came down with a head cold, and I remember staying home from school and just flipping through that book. It was just a really cool time. And it was around that time I got the Incredible Hulk mold, at least my original copy of Incredible Hulk 181. So I was really into X-Men at that time. And it was great. It was really great. So I have fond memories of Giant Size X-Men. And I enjoyed the story. And I enjoyed seeing the new characters. I thought the new characters were better than the old ones. Or at least how the old ones were portrayed up until that point. Because I was reading reprints of the older ones from a year ago. A year from before I got my Giant Size X-Men. And I remember I wasn't very impressed with the original team. I mean, I liked some members of the original team. I liked Cyclops. I liked Professor X. But reading some of the reprints that I had from classic X-Men and Marvel Masterpieces, those hardcover books, reading those collected works of Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, and all the other artists that drew X-Men after Kirby, I was like, I'm not really that impressed with this stuff. It wasn't until Chris Claremont and these new X-Men that really grabbed me when it comes to X-Men. And of course later stuff too, when Gambit and all those other characters came out. So Giant Size is very important. And I think it's not only a grail for me, it's a grail for a lot of people. So it's wonderful to have in the collection. And for those of you that have it already, I'm sure you agree. The last one for this video. This video is very eccentric, and I'm not going to go, I think this one tops it all. X-Men #1. I've owned 3 copies of this book over the years in different forms. This is the only one I have left, but I've owned 3 copies. First copy was within the first 6 months of me collecting comics, and it was a coverless copy, and the back wrap was gone. So it was incomplete. Really crappy copy. It had tons of staples on the corner, on the spine, tape on every page. The pages were brown. It felt brittle, but it wasn't the type where you open it up and it felt like it was going to fall apart. It just didn't feel strong at all. It was a really poor copy, but I got it for $35 at this comic book shop in Linden, New Jersey. So, you can't go wrong, right? For an X-Men #1 coverless, it's the closest I thought at the time that I would ever own an X-Men #1. So when I came back to the hobby, I said to myself, my #1 goal is to get an X-Men #1. I love the X-Men, and that's what I set out to do, and I did it. And I got a 3.0 copy, and eventually I had Stan Lee sign it at the New York Comic Con, I believe in 2016. Flash forward a couple of years, when I wanted to get my Amazing Fantasy 15, the book I showed in the last video, there were some books that I had to let go. And it was very hard for me to let go of that X-Men #1. I mean, I liked the idea that Stan Lee signed the book, and he later died that year, later in the year. But I wound up selling it off. I sold it, didn't trade it, so that I would have enough money to purchase this Amazing Fantasy. And it was the best thing I've ever done. Largely, I could say that because a month later, I bought this copy. So I didn't miss X-Men #1 for that long. It came back into the collection. And that second copy of X-Men #1, I eventually sold the coverless copy too, I think a year prior, which helped me get my first appearance of Doctor Strange and my upgrade of my Green Goblin. But this one's also a 3.0 minus the Stan Lee signature, but I think that this copy is much better. If you watched my 25 from 2015, my 25 most valuable comics, that's #1 at the time at least. And it was nice, but there was some damage to the book. It wasn't as white. The red was pretty bleached out, and it was the light green variant. I've always liked the dark green variant, personally. I like darker colors over lighter colors, especially that green that they used. It looked like, I don't know what, but it didn't look that good. But X-Men #1 has, been a big part of my life, big part of my X-Men comic book collecting life, right from the start. And as much as I'd like to get a 4.0, you never know. But the prices of this book has gone up tremendously. But I do have a 3.0 to sell, so I'm not necessarily too far behind a 4.0. But that's for the future. But I hope you enjoyed this latest video, a Comic Book Grails. I think that you can argue any one of these books could be a grail of sorts. You know, obviously X-Men #1, giant size X-Men #1, and X-Men 94. Now, it's funny. With each and every one of these books I showed, I've had multiple copies of each. I've actually had 2 copies of this, and I sold one off a couple of years ago. I wish I held on to it, but I didn't. I wound up getting my first copy of this from Zap Comics. They had a sale in 2014. They had that they would have like 50% off the yellow tag books, and that was one of the books that was on the wall. They had 50% off. They wouldn't do that today, I don't think. But I wound up getting it. A nice copy too. It was like an 8.0 for like maybe $175. So that was something else. But I eventually sold it off. And as you know, with my giant size, I told you I bought how I got my original copy, and I sold that one off too. Around the same time I sold my original Incredible Hulk 181 minus the Marvel stamp inside. I sold both of those off around the same time because I bought both of those, this one, around the same time. So I tried to raise some money to get rid of them. Again, I wish I kept both of them, but not because I wanted to keep them for nostalgic purposes. I probably would have sold them right now to make a hell of a lot more money than I got for both of them when I sold them years ago. But it is what it is, and you know the story of the X-Men #1. Both of them, they both were sold. The original copy I had and the original 3.0 copy I had. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoy talking about these things, and it's my purpose not only to show grails, but it's also my purpose to try to talk about the things that we love so much, the things that we chase. You know, a lot of times we buy books, new books, or I first got this book, I first got that book, but it's the real big grail issues that are the most satisfying, or at least I found for me, and the stories behind them are the most interesting. Take care, everybody.